It's been 10 years of chaos and instability at the Valley. Charlton Athletic, can they bring an end to that era this season? They've made some progress on the pitch last season under Dean Holden. Can we expect further progress for the Addicts under him? And can they make sustainable progress going forward? And what do they need to do squad-wise in order to challenge for the playoffs in League One next season? Well, to discuss all this and more, I'm delighted to be joined by three Addicts fans over here: Marcus Hoare, Ben Fleming, and Dan Finch. Good evening, gents. How are you?
Evening, not too bad.
Yeah, nice. I haven't thought about football for about 4 weeks, so it's quite nice to get back into it all.
Yeah, I haven't think about Charlton is a bit upset.
Brilliant stuff. Well, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the Addicts. Just before we get into it, I'd just like to say we're available on Spotify and on YouTube. And if you're watching this on those platforms, do give a subscribe because it helps us out an awful lot. I'm covering all 72 clubs between mid-June and mid-July across the EFL. So once you're done with this one, go check those out. Coming to you first then, Marcus, what do you how do you reflect on last season and the impact Dean Holden had since taking charge midway through?
Oh God, last season. Oh God. Started off thinking, right, Garner's coming, Garner's going to be backed. Turns out, no. Bunch of free agent signings from Swindon and League Two. And then it kind of all fell apart by November, and Holden kind of rebuilt it. January window, I don't want to talk about because it was, quite frankly, a mess. And now it's kind of like, what now? It's kind of all kind of in a holding pattern until the takeover is completed properly, and then it will be, right, what can Dean actually do? Is he going to be properly backed? And kind of like, am I going to be sitting here talking to you next half in November and we're 14th again?
Yeah, well, let's hope that's not the case.
No.
Coming to you then, Ben, the last two transfer windows at the Valley, I think you'd probably say have been failed ones because I think certainly Ben Garner made no secret about the fact that he wanted a forward, and there was obviously some frustration in what the club was able to do in January. Is that the thing that Charlton Athletic have got to get right this summer?
Yeah, definitely. You look at the amount of players we've let go and the genuine lack of top six League One talent in the team, and I think there's quite clearly a lot of ground that we need to make up between sort of where we are now and the guys that are going to be, the clubs that are going to be up in the top six. But as Marcus says, that's all really dependent on the ownership and whether that situation has been resolved. Obviously, we've made some moves early with Eisted, and there's still rumblings of Alfie May, but it looks like at this point we're going to be limited to the free agent market and probably some loans, which I think you probably struggle to find a team in the 72 that have got a worse record than us with loans in terms of who we brought in the last few years. I mean,
Zaki did well last year.
Yes. To be fair, I do stand corrected. I'm just thinking of the Gavin Kilkennys of the world and the who I can't even remember the name of the left back
Matt
from
Penny from
Ipswich, who played one game. It's just with some stuff, maybe the top teams, but certainly the recruitment has stalled, and I think that'll keep being the case really unless this takeover gets over the line.
Yeah, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Charlie Methven, who was involved in that sort of David Brent clip on Sunderland Till I Die on Netflix, is sort of in the frame to take over Charlton Athletic. Do you have some reservations about him taking charge, given doesn't exactly have glowing comments from his time at the Stadium of Light?
I think we're all intrigued to see what role he has within the club. The discussion and the word that we're hearing is that he's going to have part on the board away from the football side of things. It's obviously the club being bought by Joshua Freeman and Gabriel. Is it Brenner? I think is how you pronounce it. Obviously, and Charlie Methven's going to be almost the face, but it's from what we've heard so far, it doesn't sound like he's going to be as involved as he was at Sunderland. But obviously, as you said, he did look like a character out of the office, and you don't want that running your club when you've just had a man playing a guitar at half time on your pitch trying to. It's not a good look.
Yeah. No, it did make me chuckle, that clip. I don't want that to sort of define a person, because sometimes, people can grow, people can change over the course of a few years. So I'm going to give Charlie Methven the benefit of the doubt, but I'm sure he'll forgive me for having a few sort of reservations because his time at Sunderland wasn't hugely positive. But Marcus, Charlton have obviously got to do well in the transfer market, but the good thing that I think falls into their favour is that their academy is really prospering right now. Do you see a few of those players breaking through into the first team?
Absolutely. It's Charlton. There'll be 2 or 3 every season, as long as the academy is still funded properly, and as long as the main people that have been a part of the success of the academy are kept around. Then I think there will always be 2 or 3 every season that will break through. It's kind of been an unintended consequence of Sangard's rather rubbish transfer windows have been that you've ended up having to use the academy. So Lucas Ness started last season on loan at Torquay, and then us to come in because of injuries. Same as Zach Mitchell, who I'd expect to see around the first team as well.
You like Zach Mitchell, don't you, Marcus?
Yeah, very. I don't know if he'll. I think it kind of depends on the centre half situation. If we sign Michael Hector, then I would expect Mitchell goes out on loan, and just goes and gets some minutes, top end of the National League. We've got tends to be Bromley and Wildstone that get the pick of our academy loans a lot of the time. Yeah, so centre half is probably the main concern at the moment.
Yeah, well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Ben, how do you reflect on the impact Dean Holden has made on the club? Because I think one of his main sort of sayings, if you like, is that he wants to go into every day at the club with a really positive mindset and get players to grow every day. Has that sort of translated to some extent on the pitch?
I think. I mean, you mentioned it a bit there, sort of, his sort of personality. I think sort of off the pitch first, that's something that I think has resonated a lot with the fans. I think he's, a good sort of straight talking, says it how he sees it kind of person. And I do think, at a time when it feels like we're not getting any communication in terms of anything off the club, it's nice that at least we've got a manager who, if the players don't play well, say, yeah, we weren't at it today, or if they played well, we'll, rightfully give them their praise. In terms of the football, it's tough to know sort of to what extent is he sort of hamstrung by a pretty mediocre side, or to what extent is he a guy that can get us up and firing towards the top division. I'd like to hope towards the latter, because I do think he's I do think he's shown in patches that he can put together a good side. But I was just even reminding ourselves before we came on, I had in my mind, from a month back, we ended the season quite well, and actually look back and there's, obviously that thumping by Ipswich, and there's a 3-2 loss to Morecambe, and it's like, actually, okay, we didn't have anything to play for, but to what extent was he putting together a team that I can now look back on and say, actually, that they can make that next jump up. I mean, it's obviously dictated by transfers. But I like to think that there is some optimism around him, and I think I'd still like to see him given a good crack of the whip.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he certainly deserved that. Dan, I imagine you'll tell me George Dobson is a player for Dean Holden to build his team around next season. Who are the others that you'd put in that category?
I think that's part of the problem. We don't really have many. I think you've got Dobson. I'd say Michael Hector, if he does come back, is a big key. And I think Lee Burn's the other one up front. We've got to keep him and make sure that he's not elsewhere. And I think Fraser and Dobson as a pair can drive us forward. But I'm concerned, as Marcus said, that the centre backs could be questionable. We've not got many. Sam Lavell's come back from loan. Whether he stays around, we don't know. See, we're not sure about Michael Hector's situation. So all we've really got at the minute Zach Mitchell and Ella Iriwe, who were both playing in the National League last year, and then Lucas Ness, who missed 4 months, I think, towards the end of the season, and Terrell Thomas. So the base that we've got in maybe like Dobson, Fraser, Lieburn, you want that spine, don't you? So I'm thinking a really solid Michael Hector and Lucas Ness, for instance, could be the key.
And then Eisted as well had a really good loan at Barnsley, Dan. So that actually looks like a decent spine to start with if you can keep those players fit.
Indeed, great. Especially with, as I said, like Lieburn's going to be the catalyst, isn't he? Like, I think as Charlton fans, we've all kind of given up on Chukwuemeka's existence because of his injury, sadly. Because if he's fit, then he's a difference maker, one of the best difference makers in the league. So there is going to be a lot of pressure on Lieburn to make that difference.
Yeah, I don't want to completely write off Chukwuemeka because I think from the bench, I think he's a little bit like Johnny Williams in the sense that he's the kind of player you want to play for 60 minutes one game, play 20 minutes the next game, rest him for a third game, and then maybe give him another 60, 70 minutes. Whereas, and often he can be a useful impact from the bench as well, but you want to kind of dip him in and out, whereas you can't be, just because of his injury issues, you can't rely on him to start every game. That's just not how he's built. But I certainly think he can still be an asset from the bench. But Marcus, how does that spine that Dan was talking there sound to you as a starting point?
I think Eisted is signed to be first choice. I don't think.
Yeah, definitely.
I think regardless of the Barnsley situation, which probably Michael Duff leaving has probably, for someone like I said that was there on loan, has probably helped us sign him because he wouldn't sign for Barnsley because he doesn't know who the manager's going to be. Spine, Hector, if he signs, I still have a suspicion that he's holding out for a championship deal. And if he doesn't get one by the start of the season, he'll sign on a 1-year type thing. Happy with Fraser and Dobson. Just don't know who the third centre mid in there. If Holden is going to stick with 4-3-3.
Do you reckon? Sorry, just to jump in on that, Marcus. Do you think it'll be you'll look for a box-to-box type midfielder to complement Dobson and Fraser? Maybe someone who can get a few goals.
Someone that's
an engine.
Yeah, someone that's got an engine that's box-to-box and gives you goals, because goals in midfield, or at least centrally, we haven't had since Jacko, Conor Gallagher.
Yeah. Jackson.
We haven't really had that goals at 8 to 10 goal centre mid. And the other big thing is, how are you replacing 15 goals, 10 assists from Maxaki? That's a massive piece. Is how do you replace that production from a... You very rarely see loan players that produce anywhere near the numbers.
Yeah.
Something like that Saki did.
Yeah. Do you know what though, Marcus? I think it's a double-edged sword though, because sometimes you can lose a key player and massively drop off because you just simply haven't got the numbers to make up. And I'm well aware that that's a danger for Charlton. On the other hand, sometimes I think there can be an unhealthy dynamic where when there's one individual that's so much better than the rest of the squad that it almost becomes a give the ball to Raksaki as opposed to maybe creating the chances organically.
Yeah. It did at times. Sides did try to double mark him, and he still tried to double mark him. Sides started kicking lumps out of him, and he still scored 15.
But I think Lieburn
the big one would be Corey Blackett-Taylor actually staying fit for a whole season.
I think he's more one-dimensional than Ratsky, though, Marcus.
Yeah, I think if Corey Blackett-Taylor, if he played every game every season against Pompey, if all he had to do was play against Pompey, he'd be the best player in the league.
I mean, to be fair, if we just played 46 games against Pompey, then
It's interesting that though, Dan. I think you were going to say something there about Lieburn being really important to kind of counterbalance the possible drop off in productivity without Raksaki.
Yeah, and also with Raksaki, I think Lieburn's physical nature, strong, but has that turn of pace which we saw, and being able to break the defence. It meant that defenders they couldn't focus on Ratsaki, because when they did, then Leeburn was able to win one-on-one battles, which then frees up the likes of Blackett Taylor to be one-on-one. I think they worked as a three. It was quite often that two would be on Ratsaki and Leeburn, and there was a one-on-one for Blackett Taylor. And I think we still could have that effect because of how physical Leeburn is. I think the idea that Holden, we saw a little bit, and I don't think he trusts his midfield enough, is he wants Scott Fraser to be playing a little bit further forward, and kind of be that second striker to get into the box late. I think that will be the extra space. I think what he's missing, as you said, is the box to box. I don't think he trusted Albie Morgan to quite play that role. So Fraser getting forward then makes up that space that Ratsaki leaves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that for Scott Fraser, though, because I understand how you'd want a player of his creativity as high up the pitch as possible. But I want to come to you on this, Ben. For me, I would also want Scott Fraser on the ball as much as possible. And I would worry that if you put him into a second striker role, he actually wouldn't be able to influence the games in the way that he's maybe capable of.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know what Dan says, because there was a period actually around that. I think we beat, it might have been Morecambe, I think it was. We scored sort of like two or three goals in the first half towards the end of the season, and he was playing in that further forward position, getting on the ball, sort of less touches, as you say, Gab. You know, less influence further back the pitch, but getting the goals. He sort of is. You know, if you play him in the deep role, he is going to be more influential in that sense. But he can sort of do both. So I guess maybe it's a case of holding the recruitment team saying, okay, well, you know, if we can sign a number 10 or a sort of second striker, then Fraser can fulfill that more creative role. Or actually, if we can bring in a person who can play that creative role alongside Dobson, then maybe we can give Fraser that sort of creative license to go forward and be that number 10. So I think he's probably someone that's quite easy to, you know, quite easy and quite capable of doing both roles. So it might be a case of, you know, looking at who we can bring in and then sort of fitting him around the rest of the midfield, because I do think he can do both those roles pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, sorry, just to say, also, you've got to remember that we're replacing Ratsaki's game overall, that we're not going to get a winger in, it's very unlikely, that sits in the space that Ratsaki did. So that space off the ball is going to be open for Fraser to drift into, to play those passes into whoever the front three is going to be. That's how I took watching Holden's football in that period that Ben was talking about, where Fraser was in that 10, was him to drift the ball, and then he can find the passes out to Blackett Taylor, Campbell, Charlie Kirk if he hangs around this season.
That's a really interesting point, actually, Dan, because I remember Scott Fraser playing as a sort of left-sided 8 or 10 attacking midfielder, let's say, for MK Dons in the 2021 season, and they played a 3-4-2-1 with like a box midfield, and he kind of very much drifted into, whether I'm being a bit sort of modern and hipster by calling him a Mazzala, but he's one who would drift into the left channel, and then they had a left wing back called what's his name? The lad who went to somewhere in Belgium, Sorinola, who'd kind of cut inside, and so it kind of, they sort of dovetail quite nicely. So whether Scott Fraser can do what you were saying, which is drifting into the channel and then create space for other players, I think he's really capable of doing that.
Do you think, Gab, that fullback is going to be another big one? We haven't. Mandela, if he can stay fit.
Who's that?
We got a lot of him last season. Left backs, we haven't got any.
Egbo is the only wing back we have currently.
Egbo's the only fullback on the books at the moment.
Yeah, we played Terrell Thomas there, left back.
Yeah.
Terrell Thomas obviously played there a bit, didn't he, last season? I didn't think he played awfully, but you'd prefer a more senior option. But again, when was the last time we had a really solid left back? Probably Ben Perrington, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last proper natural left back.
I rather feel surprised that you released Charles Claydon, because I actually really liked what I've seen of him.
Claydon was a weird one. Never really. It was almost one that was chucked in out of necessity.
Didn't he? Because I think we signed him
as a left-sided player, really.
Yeah,
I think he's sorry, go on.
So I was just saying, we brought him in as a forward for the 23s, and then all of a sudden I think we played Wimbledon in a Carabao Cup game, and he played left back, and then that's what he stayed for the next 6 months before. I think we shipped him out on loan a few times, so I wasn't really shocked what he'd done.
See, I felt like I saw the game at Wickham under Bengana back in August, I think it was now, and he actually forged quite a nice partnership with Charlie Kirk, because I feel like they kind of complement each other this game quite nicely. So anyway, I think Clayton's going to go on and have a decent career in the EFL. Hopefully he does that. But Ben, those fullback or wingback areas, probably fullbacks, that's going to be crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think I echo the guys. I think Egbo did show in glimpses that there is a solid attacking League One right back, if fit. So I think Sean Clare did a stopgap job, but was never really the sort of natural fullback that we needed. So I do think I do think that Egbo, if he can keep himself fit for and play sort of 35 to 40 games a season, is absolutely worthy of being in that team sheet. Yeah, Terrell Thomas on the left, sort of, I don't know, like a sort of League One Dan Burn, just far too tall for left back and just marauding down. I do think I'd like to see someone a bit more natural for the role, but again, it's going to be it's going to be hampered by budgets and that sort of thing, and maybe if he's in the squad, he's someone that they're going to have to plop in that role until they can find something more permanent. But yeah, I think at the minute those fullback roles are key, and centre back. As much as I'm glad that Innes was shown the door. I think he was not of the level. We kept saying for all these times, God, we're conceding 6 against Ipswich. The defence is all over the place, and yet we're probably going to go into next season with Ness and Hector starting again as our 2 centre backs, which I'm not necessarily against. I do think they are good centre backs, but it's difficult to marry them being the 2 starting centre backs from last year going into next season, and then us suddenly thinking that we're going to have a much better defense. Maybe it's sort of more system based and a lot more tactical than that. But that's just sort of, I don't know how I see it on a sort of surface level.
Did they play much together? Because Ness's injury was.
Yeah, I guess they maybe didn't play as much together. But
because Hector came at the end of the window, didn't he? Because he wasn't part of the squad that went to Manchester to the cup game. And Ness didn't get injured long after that, I don't think. So I'm not sure how much they played together. Be interested to see.
That is true. Certainly as a 2, I think that I think I'd like to see that work. But certainly if one of them gets injured, I'm not exactly too excited by who's next up to fill that gap.
Yeah, well, hopefully Terrell Thomas can play a role with his sort of versatility. But with that in mind, Dan, how many more additions are Charlton going to need in order to launch a playoff bid for next season?
I think, well, as we'd probably need at least 3 fullbacks, left back, 2 left backs and a right back. I think another striker, because as we touched on with Anike, we just don't know how fit he's going to be. So there's a need for another, I'd say, a senior striker, because obviously Lee Byrne and Carney are both under 21. Okay. I think another winger as well. As much as I know currently we've got Jaisimi and Kirk, but whether they'll both still be here come August the 1st, I'd be shocked if both of them are. I wouldn't be shocked if neither of them are there. So I think a good winger, I think a solid striker, and then, as I said, some fullbacks. I think maybe an extra midfielder to bulk it out, but I think the key area is probably a striker and those fullbacks.
Yeah, so 6 or 7 then you're probably looking at. Marcus, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, of those 6 or 7, how many do you think are going to have to go in there and immediately improve the first 11?
4 or 5. Mm-hmm. I'd say your 2 of your fullbacks have got to be starters. Or a right back or a right back that's at least competition for Egbo.
Sure.
Centre mid, whoever obviously comes in as a centre mid. All again, this is system based on it being the same 4-3-3 shape, which it might not be. Don't know. So the centre mid would be a starter. The winger would be a starter. And the striker would probably be someone Striker's a tough one. All these rumours about Alfie May are kind of, I don't get it. Not that I don't get it. Alfie May's a good player, but I don't see him. He's not going to usurp Leeburn.
He plays in a front two as well. That's where
exactly. Unless Holden suddenly decides that he's going to play 3-5-2 next season, which he could. But then you're looking at completely different players.
Yeah.
So I'd say
also I think 3-5-2. It's harder to go from a 3-5-2 to a 4-3-3. You can maybe go from a 3-4-3 to a 4-3-3 because you can drop a defensive midfielder into centre back.
Yeah.
But it's a harder transition going 3-5-2 to 4-3-3.
Yeah. I'm predicating everything at the moment off it being the 4-3-3. So it would be whoever the right winger is would be your back. Calling anyone a Vaksaki replacement is harsh, but in effect, it would be a replacement for Vaksaki. So, and then third centre mid, someone who's got box to box energy, scores a few goals. But again, players like that, have we got the budget to get?
Do you know what? I'd look at
someone. What I'm thinking is someone of the quality of an. Obviously, he's way out of range, but someone like Aaron Morley, someone of that ability.
Sure. I'm thinking if it's going to be a limited budget, I'd probably look at someone like Ben Garrity at Port Vale, who I don't know if either of you have seen him, but he's like a box-to-box midfielder that's super energetic, and he's come up from way down the non-league system, and he's just got this infectious mentality, and I just feel like he could be the one that complements Dobson and Fraser, because I think he'd be good for a few goals from midfield as well. So
I think the other thing is we normally max our loans out, so it'll probably be if it's not someone on a free from a championship side, not sure who's out there, then it will be a 18 to 20-year-old Prem kid on their first or second loan out. Names wise, I don't think someone like Jensen Weir at Brighton's possibly realistic. I think he's possibly too good for League One now and probably goes Championship.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, coming to you on this, Ben, it feels like from what Marcus has described there, the club goes for these Premier League loanees and sort of championship sort of pickups, players who've been released, and really all the sort of high potential value at the club comes from the academy. But that's a lot of strain, I think, to put on the academy, to put them under so much pressure to create the value in the squad. And I just wonder, I have a lot of sympathy for the budgetary limitations at Charlton. I don't want to underestimate that. But maybe there's the possibility that they could do just a little bit more to invest in high potential talent from the lower leagues and be prepared to pay the occasional 6-figure fee in order to get the 7-figure fees a couple of years down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any Charlton fan would be, crying out for any sort of investment. I mean, even you think about, I know he doesn't garner a lot of goodwill around Charlton, but you think about one of the ones we did invest with, Macaulay Bonne. I mean, he didn't actually do a whole lot for us in that season. Scored made 12 goals. We actually took QPR to the cleaners for however many millions we got, the next year. So I think, as you say there, Gabe, that's a example of someone that we can, those kind of players. I mean, the problem, of course, we had is that we had the owner's son, who, probably has about as much experience in football analytics as I do playing Football Manager, running our analytics and sort of scouting department. So hopefully, one of the good things about seeing the back of Sangard, one of the many things is perhaps the installment of some actual analytics, scouting, leadership that can help sort of, as you say, pick up those kind of lower league guys that might have.
Actually, Ben, while we're on that, can you remind me? I think when Dean Holden was appointed, wasn't he appointed at the same time as a new backroom team where there were a couple of people that were announced in senior? They escaped me the actual names and roles, but I think there were a few appointments.
It was Jim Rodwell and Alex Scott, wasn't it?
Yeah, so
Kieran Scott.
Andy
Scott,
yeah. Well, they all came in as part of the Methven deal as it was then. with the idea being that there'd been that deal in place and they were going to come in as a sort of stopgap until Methven fully took over. But of course, when that takeover fell through, initially they were all let go. So those were guys that were brought in, as you said, to provide some experience. But then again, that the Scott guy that you mentioned, I think he did that interview January the 1st, saying, "Oh, I wouldn't have been brought in if there wasn't funds to play with," and lo and behold, there were no funds to play with. So it's a proper I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing with Charlton and sort of any sort of board or owner putting any money into the club.
Say is it? I wonder if the last couple of years Sangard got spooked with transfer fees, because if you look at the players that we have bought in for fees, how many of them were actually successes? 300 grand on Aneke, 500,000 on Kirk, 300 grand on Lavelle, 300 grand on Giacchini.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Kind of.
I can't argue with that.
I don't know. Fraser really the only that came in.
He's not been a roaring success, has he? No, I think that's a really valid point, actually.
I almost wonder if he got completely spooked and then went Timber, and then he's gone too far in the other direction. Too many youngsters chucked in. And I also kind of think I think he's probably spent the last year trying to sell the club, and kind of he's finally got to the point. Last summer was a mess. January, I don't know what happened there. That's something that I forgot. Centre mid, McGrandles.
God, the guy was even contracted.
McGrandles is back. Don't know if we'll see him. Might.
He did really well at Cambridge, so you never know.
He could barely played.
Yeah,
I think he played like 5 games for us, and then got quite a bad injury, didn't he? And then by the time that
was it hand or something?
I think he broke his hand on his debut, and then got a really bad ankle injury, and then then by the time he was fit, he was out on loan at Cambridge.
Yeah, well, hopefully he can make an impact. I think what Marcus said there about the fact that Sangard has been looking to sell the club for the last year and maybe hasn't been looking to show the same ambition that he maybe had when he first came in, and the fact there's new ownership happening late in the summer, Dan, that suggests to me that this is, to some extent, a rebuilding season for Charlton Athletic, but you've kind of got to sort of balance that out with the fact that it's an open league this year, probably as open as it's going to be for a long time, and with that comes a massive opportunity for Charlton Athletic, because barring 2 or 3 teams, there's not many that I'd really be truly scared about. So how do you balance those two things as an addict, Dan? Do you see this as how much do you see it as a rebuilding season, and how much do you sense that opportunity to really kick on, given how open the league is?
Yeah, I think this season is really interesting for the point you just made. I see the season as, for us, step 1 in recovery. I'm not necessarily thinking that we're going to be up there. I see us more in pushing for that playoff spot. I think there are going to be sides that are better than us. So I think it is about making sure you get the right bodies in, and the club's got a lot to do to correct itself from its mistakes. So I think as much as we should expect to be up there based off like what people say is the size of the club. Actually, I think it's just first of all, let's just get things right, see where the season leads us, and if we are in the playoff picture come the end of the season, we don't miss out. I wouldn't be massively shocked or unhappy, because I think that's probably what we should be aiming for.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that as much as it is a transitional time for the club and there are mitigating factors that make things difficult for Dean Holden, I still think there should be a certain element or a certain level of expectation, that not expecting Charlton to be in the top 6, but I think Charlton have a right to expect to be in the conversation for the top 6, and I think that's probably the target that's going to be set to Dean and his management team. Ben, how are you feeling about the rest of the summer then? Are you excited for what Charlton can do, for a bit of change?
Yeah, we'll see. I think every Charlton fan has always been hoping for early business. It sort of feels like it gets to middle of August and the first game rolls around and we're still 3-4 nailed on starters away from a complete squad. And Eisted's a good start, but hopefully you want to see, as Mark said, those 4 or 5 guys that are going to have to come straight into the starting 11 in sooner rather than later. Playing with the squad in pre-season, getting used to the system that Holden wants to put together, because it's sort of what has cost us the last 2 years. I mean, I don't think we'd have been up there anyway, but we had a horrible slow start with Adkins. We had a horrible slow start with Garner. Even for as middling and mediocre the season was, we were still 10th 11th last year. So it doesn't take much in terms of in that initial period to not be so far behind the 8 ball. And as Dan said, we could easily find ourselves in that sort of 6 to 9 region and be sort of looking to move upwards. But I do think takeover's got to get sorted sooner rather than later, and we need to see at least some semblance of some more early business getting in, because if we get as Mark said, we are going to rely on the loans from the Premier League teams, but they always tend to come out later in the window. That's always just the nature of loans from those clubs. But if we can get a good solid crux of that squad in by sort of early July, then I'm always going to be positive, but I think there's reasons and there's semblances of a squad that can at least push on beyond last season, and that's got to be the aim at the bare minimum, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like with Charlie Methven and the new ownership regime coming in, I would really like to see them all, including Dean Holden, introduce a fans forum straight away. And I would like to see Charlie Methven, whether he's going to take on a sort of chief executive or CEO type role, I would like to see him say, look, I've learned from some mistakes from the past, and I feel like I can, I've sort of matured and I've grown, and I'd be really honest and direct. I'd like to see that sort of communication, because I think if they can do that, then I think that would give Charlton fans a lot of oxygen, a lot of sort of room to believe in their club again, because it feels like the connection has drifted away a lot over the last 10 years, and I hope that's something that can be repaired, really.
I also don't think we're not asking for the world. It's really, can we just have someone that just keeps things ticking over? We're not jumping from controversy to laughing stock from week to week. Can we just have someone that just keeps it steady, as we've said a couple of times, maybe once to put a bit of cash in, but we don't need anything over the top. Plymouth, one of the best run teams in League One have shown that you run a club well, you don't need to break the bank, and you find yourself in the Championship the next year. So I really don't think any Charlton fan is asking for the world in terms of just a nice stable owner, and as you say, Gabe, a bit of transparency, a bit of making yourself available to the fans. I think that's what every football fan wants for their sort of club owner. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can have that.
Absolutely.
And I think,
I've certainly go on.
I was just going to say, I think we showed under that kind of barrier stretch, that maybe year and a half before COVID going up, and then the 6 months, that the fans will go with you if you just show that you care. I think that year and a half, even that 6 months, like during COVID, just before COVID, where we were, like 15th, 14th in the Championship, the fans were sticking because Bowyer was showing the players this is what it means to play for Charlton Athletic. The players were responding, and the club responded. The atmosphere changed that year, and then it went back again to how it was once he left.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've certainly got my fingers crossed for Charlton Athletic, even from a neutral perspective as a Birmingham City fan. I know what it's like to be chaotically run. I want to come to you, Marcus, because I've got to predict my 1 to 24s in a few weeks' time. So that'll obviously be quite controversial. I'm sure I'll get some very kind replies. I was in danger of liking you for a moment, Marcus. No, yeah, we'll have to see what I go with. But I wanted to come to you, Marcus, for what would be the reason for me to be massively in favour of Charlton Athletic for this season and say, yes, they can get into the top 6.
I think it's probably young talent and players that have had, or at least half a season in League One, and it's can they make that next step? Can someone like Leeburn, with a full season, if he stays fully fit and we keep hold of him and he isn't sold in January for peanuts, can he hit 20? I see no reason why he can't score 20.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what is a Dean Holden side with Dean Holden signings? And with Dean Holden with a whole pre-season under his belt to get his philosophy across, get his players in. I think it could be pretty exciting. Bit of investment towards the end of the window. As long as it's not on, as long as the players are still available and we're not left rummaging around in the bargain bin like we have been for the last couple of years with some slightly questionable, at best, loan signings. I don't see why we can't be in the top 6 conversation if the recruitment is right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, actually, because there was certainly improvement under Dean Holden with the personnel that he inherited, and not a great January window. So if he can, now he's got a full pre-season and hopefully improved recruitment, then you never know what sort of impact that can have. Ben, what would be the reason to be really cautious about Charlton for next season and say they might finish in the bottom half?
Oh, it's the ownership plans up. We know if they come in and, you know, show no signs of investment, you know, there's still obviously no agreement in place for the stadium or the training ground and the club to be sort of all brought under one banner again. You know, we've seen many a time that you know, we've had owners that haven't lived up to the billing, and you know, they can easily come in, not spend a penny, and as Marcus said, you know, someone like Miles Leeburn goes out on the cheap in January. You know, Tyrese Campbell, Lucas Ness have a good 6 months, and then they go in January because it's an ownership group that's looking to, you know, make a profit rather than your, you know, sort of strip assets. Then that's obviously the concern that will always linger over this ownership group until they prove otherwise. So yeah, I think you know, you always look to be positive, but that's always the big uncertain. And you know, who even knows whether the ownership will go through? You know, they still got to pass the owners and directors test. I think, you know, worst case scenario that doesn't happen, and then yeah, Sangard's given the knock on the door. Actually, you've still got to run this football club. I mean, then where do we go? You know, I really don't want to think about that.
Yeah. Oh. Well, on that bombshell, that seems like an awful place to leave it, but I feel like we've covered everything. Listen, gents, such a pleasure to chat Charlton Athletic with you. Hopefully the ownership does go through and there's positive communication from the football club, because these supporters have been incredibly loyal to the football club. I've got so much admiration for you guys and what you've kind of been through over the last 10 years or so. So I hope you can find the solutions, and I hope Charlton Athletic can move forward under Dean Holden. Such a pleasure to chat addicts with you lot. Go check them out on these guys out on Twitter, because yeah, it's been a great chat. Thanks to you for watching at home. This has been EFL Debate, the Charlton Athletic Summer Deep Dive with Marcus Hoare, Ben Fleming and Dan Finch. We'll see you again very soon.
Cheers, Gabe.
Cheers.